Hi, Dr. Ted. Thanks for being on the show.
Jodi.
Hey.
Oh, thanks for having me.
My gosh, this has been a long time coming. I've been so excited to have you on the show for so long. Tell me, what time is it where you are? It's 10 o'clock, is it? We're just at 10:30.
It's 9:19 p.m.
Oh, thank you so much for taking your night out for me as well.
A day ahead of you. A day later than you, actually.
Later,
You're
yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm used to staying up until midnight anyway, because I do have a health optimization medicine practice in Asia, as you know, and I'm there 30 days every quarter. And so when I'm here in Washington, D.C., I usually have to stay up until midnight anyway to catch, until midday of the business day in Asia. So yes, I'm awake.
You're awake. Very much awake. Doing much better than I would be doing it. Last night I was thinking about us meeting today, and I was like, it was 10 o'clock for me at the time last night. I was like, I wouldn't be awake. I don't know how you're going to do it.
No, I one of the things that one of the things that was unique to what I taught before was Dr. Ted's sleep anchoring technique, right? You anchor your day to the beginning of your sleep. So your day begins at the time you sleep. So my day begins at midnight. And as his first activity. So because if you schedule your first activity as the first thing that you wake up, then you're going to likely skimp on your sleep. But if sleep is the first activity, then you're more likely to complete your sleep, and then your next activity will be whatever it is when you wake up. Right?
Yes.
So when you write down your schedule, sleep should be first.
Sleep should be number one priority.
Yeah. Number one priority.
Yeah. Well,
and that's why I'm awake.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So I wanted to dive into all about you. So tell us all about Ted and what. I know this is going to be huge, and I would have given the introduction already and told everyone a little bit about you, but your history and what you've done is exponentially amazing. I love it, and everything you are and everything you are about, I absolutely love. So we could talk just about you for this whole podcast, I think. And I also wanted
that will be a massive, explosion of my ego. Something that I've been trying to suppress for so many.
Well, you can explode today. That's okay. And I also wanted to ask you about your IQ, because that was something originally that really fascinated me about you, about your high IQ and being one of the smartest people in the whole planet alive. So
you mean you've been victimized by my IQ via my humor, right? So
absolutely. So tell me a little bit about you.
Yes. Well, I was one of those who, entered college when I was 15 years old, and I finished college in 3 years. So, and that was a full bachelor's of science in biology, and so at 18 I was a medical student already.
Goodness.
And I was not one of these new, medical courses where you could just go directly into medicine and complete it in 6 or 7 years. This is a full college degree, and so I was a physician when I was 22 years old, and my training was also accelerated. I essentially was. I trained in 3 areas initially in Manila, where I studied and became faculty in pharmacology and toxicology. And that's why I love you when you compound your own herbals. I love that stuff.
I was just compounding one just there. Love it. The smell of herbs.
I did work with indigenous medicinal plants for fertility regulation. So, and that was a huge avenue of research for me. And then I was also trained in interventional neuroradiology. That means, I joke always that I used to poke brains for a living. Um, and in some cases, it's called minimally invasive neurosurgery. Because you don't have to open the skull to do the stuff that you need to do, right? And then uh, I was also clinical assistant professor, clinical professor of neurology, um, and all of those was done in the Philippines. But I was also very politically active, and 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 you know one thing led to another, so I had to leave um, the Philippines, but on invitation by the George Washington University medical school here in
Mhm.
Washington, DC. And I came in not as a trainee, I also came in as faculty.
Mm.
And I was trained in medical informatics by the pioneer of medical informatics, the one who
Mm.
started the whole field globally, Bill
Wow.
Yamamoto. And his research was in artificial intelligence.
Mm.
And when I entered his lab, he asked me two questions. He's asked me, "Is beauty computable?" And I said, "Yes." And "Is consciousness computable?" And I said, "Yes." I made a mistake. I chose consciousness. If I chose beauty, I would have been rich by now. Um, and um, in there in my research, I wrote the book, which is now being called the first connectome, or the database of connections for an organism. It's a roundworm called C. elegans, and it's the workworm for research in anti-aging medicine.
Wow.
And then I was also trained in socially responsible finance by
Mhm.
the guy who started socially responsible investing, Wayne Silby, and that's when I became senior science and technology advisor to many companies, particularly investment firms. And
Mm.
then after that, I started my own company, Group Serve. It was a groupware company, and I created the first commercially viable wireless groupware.
Mhm.
I have patents on that, and
Mhm.
I basically created lots of pieces of software that now pertains to medical imaging, like for MRI,
Mm.
like your listeners who would know what edge detection algorithms are. I worked on those, um, and these are now being applied, for example, for facial recognition in artificial intelligence, because that's why my work is, right?
Wow.
And then after the company, I used my artificial intelligence knowledge to go to an area where I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about money, so I studied currencies worldwide. And well, the currency day starts in Sydney. It's the first market that opens up.
The center
That's
of the
why,
world, sort of.
yeah, center of the world. Yes. And there was a time when the Australian dollar used to be the carry trade of the Japanese housewife, and that's that's how its value kept on increasing. The Japanese housewives kept on buying the Australian
Fine.
dollar, and yeah. But I use artificial intelligence models in order to predict trades. For your listeners who know about complex adaptive systems, that was where my work was also. The things that like the logo of health optimization medicine. The
Mm.
the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
That's part of complex adaptive systems.
Yeah.
um, and then after that, and I said, well, okay, done with this. my friend reminded me, he said, okay, you're playing a zero sum game. You know, but before that, he when I was in about 35 years old, basically I was asked by investors, hey Ted, where do you think um, medicine is going? And that was when I was 35, and I said, well, it's going into regenerative medicine, it's going into wellness medicine, it's going into health, it's going to move away from disease.
Mm.
So 10 years later, I went to Paris and retrained myself, put my money where my prediction was, right? And retrained myself in anti-aging medicine and nutritional medicine, and I got board certified over there.
Amazing.
And the guy who trained me in anti-aging medicine was the guy who started the entire field of hormone balancing, Terry
Wow.
Hercog. So I was lucky to do that. So even when I was in Manila, I was trained by the pioneers there of neurology or pharmacology. They're the ones who started their fields,
Mm.
um, and of interventional neuroradiology. So I was lucky to be trained by pioneers. Those you really get the perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I know I speak to you every week in meetings, Jodi, and I always say that the best gift, or in fact, the only gift that a mentor can give a student is perspective. When you have
Yeah.
that perspective, it never leaves you. You learn how to look at that. So that's uh, but I maintain my interests going. I'm abreast with all the new developments in the thinking about consciousness.
Mm.
I keep abreast with relationship between physics and consciousness,
Mm.
whether or not it could be solved that way. You never leave your curiosity behind. But at the same time, I also never lost my interest. Like, how the fuck do I increase my brain functioning, right? So
Yeah.
nootropics, before nootropics became even vogue, like 15 years
Yeah.
ago, I was
Yeah.
already looking at nootropics and said, what drugs can I actually take in order to increase brain function, and so on. So that has been, and then the whole field of nootropics sort of like with the advent of long form podcasts and so on, they became more and more popular. And
Mm.
that's why I was being surprised, for example, like, that was already known like several years ago. But I actually enjoy this stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because yeah, because what you've known many years ago is like, oh my god, this is new information for so many people, and that's a lot of fun for me. And
Yeah.
it's like, but on the other hand, it's like can't we have any other new thing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Bored for your brain. For all of us, we're like, ooh, this is
yeah.
really new.
But you know what? I am actually enthralled at the fact that the younger generation has expressed more interest in this, right?
Mm.
On a population sense of people are interested. There's a lot more people interested in
Yeah.
doing this.
Yeah.
And when, like, for example, when I was formulating blue carnitine, which I know we'll talk about later, it's a
Mm.
nootropic, you
Mm.
know, um, uh, it was already time. People knew about the action of methylene blue and the action of nicotine. They already had their history. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
when I was looking at those ingredients the first time before I actually put together, people were so afraid of all of these things. Like, what
Mm.
would people say, and so on. And then the thing with a lot of the things that I do, like even with health optimization, for
Mm.
example, is that it's experiential, right?
Mm.
You have to experience the whole thing. uh, but of course, it's always the ego that needs the experience. As they say, in enlightenment, there is no the experiencer disappears, the experience disappears, and there's only experiencing. So,
Mm.
my goal is to formulate something that will just give you the experiencing
Experience, yeah.
without, without necessarily having an experiencer
Yes.
or an experience. So it's
Oh.
no, it's very simple.
Mm.
There is no objective. It's like, for example, there's no object to be seen. There is no one seeing. There's
Yeah.
just seeing.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that fascinates me, is that in various states of consciousness,
Yeah.
the 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 one that's seeing disappears,
Mm.
and the one that the objects of being seen disappears. Is just seeing. There's just this oneness that goes.
Same.
And
Yeah.
for short periods of time, those are achievable by um how do they call it, mind altering molecules. So anyway,
Which we will get
so
into.
in terms, yes, so in terms of so that's my background. That's my short background. In fact, Jodi, honestly, I had no plans. I thought I was gonna die at 40. I compressed so
Really?
much of my life, and I said, yeah, I had no plans. Like, 40, I'm good to die. I'm good to
Wow.
go. Yeah, yeah.
No.
Yeah. Um, so one of the things that I think I can share, especially with your viewers or listeners, is the fact that I had severe existential angst.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was about 16 years old, I was a junior in college. I was
Mm.
graduating with honors, the
Yeah.
next year and so on. Yeah, I tried to. I said, this is boring. So I tried to find my reset button and found it in my right wrist. So and that's the thing.
Mm.
When, for example, I have patients or clients that come to me and they are complaining about depression, I do
Yeah.
understand what it is because I've
Yeah.
been there, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's something that was recurrent, and especially it occurred when I was at 40. And
Mm.
one of the things that helped me through it was actually balancing my hormones and nutrients. When I learned how to do it, how to do that, without any additional antidepressants or anything like that. But of
Mm-mm.
course, with a lot of exercise, we know how that's so beneficial for
Absolutely.
depression, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. At the peak of the depression, I forced myself to exercise about 3 hours a day.
Wow.
And yeah, and that they are uh 65% better than
Mm.
traditional antidepressants, right? So
Exactly. Our
yes,
own. Our
so but
own.
you have to,
Yeah.
yeah, you just have to force yourself to do it. And that's for me. And it's and of course that also um pushed me to study other states of consciousness and so on, what might be producing this. And so that pushed me to study default mode networks,
Mm.
self-rumination, you know autobiographical sense of self. Like, usually when I tell my story, I would get depressed, right? Because it's something that has to do with me. Well, and my default mode network is like
Doesn't like that.
activating.
Yeah.
It doesn't like that.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that are, of course, the flow states, which, when I was in the operating room, I would experience the flow states. That's because your task positive network or your central executive network would be dampening your default
Mm.
mode, which is all about you. That's all. And you feel this, your time just dilates. You work with the patient, and pretty soon it's like, oh my god, 4 6 hours has passed,
Yeah.
which is a definition of what a flow state is. So these are,
Absolutely.
all of the fields in my life that I've been in, they
Mm.
really had certain things in common. Number one is that I was always interested in how things were networked, right?
Yeah.
When, like, for example, when I was studying pharmacology, when you take a look at drug effects, or you take a look at the effects of herbals, etc., how they affect not only your target, but they affect the entire organism. And systems biology was a very young subject then, right? And we still took a look at our body as as a system of organs, right? But now, when I was thinking about health optimization medicine, I was looking at the body as a network of cells, right? A network of organisms, right? So if you look at it evolutionarily, the body is really an ecosystem of organisms. Like, for example, as I like to say, the somatic cell is really, if you take a look at it, your mitochondria are separate bacteria that are living inside your cell, an average of 500, except for red blood cells, right? Of them inside your cells. And they power you up. The liver and the brain, for example, have very high amounts of mitochondria, like 1 to 2,000 per cell. And the reason for that is they have to provide high amounts of energy. And even your endocrine glands, other endocrine glands, aside from the liver, for example, would have that high amount of mitochondria also, and these are bacteria that produce energy for you. However, they're the first ones to give out, right? Look at your heart. It's one of the first ones to give out. It also requires a lot of mitochondria because it's pumping. It needs energy. It doesn't have much energy reserve. The brain doesn't have much energy reserve. That's why it uses 20% of your glucose, right? The heart doesn't have as much energy reserve. It uses 60% of your fatty acid reserves. So these are the kinds of things that are that you begin to see once you stop looking at the person as an individual and start looking at the person as an ecosystem. That's why this is what they call the holobiont perspective, right?
Yes.
And with that kind of perspective, even your gut microbiota now becomes part of you. It's part of your ecosystem. It's no longer like, they're bacteria that are outside. Right?
It's me. It's part of me.
It's me. It's part of you. And if you take a look at the more recent diagrams, you have skin bacteria. I've notified some ophthalmologist friends of mine. There are corneal, bacteria. I remember there are corneal transplants that are being done, right? As a procedure. So they should be made aware of this. There are many things that are wrong that we've learned from medical school. We've always been taught that urine is a sterile fluid. It's not. The ureters, where the urine passes from the kidney to your bladder, actually have their resident bacteria in them. And in Milan, just a few months ago, there was a big debate on the placenta, which we thought before was a sterile system. They were showing that at particular times it would be showing that there was bacteria even in the placenta itself. So
Amazing.
we might need to change our thinking about how the baby's intestines are actually colonized. This is purely vaginal, right? Or is purely vaginal and from the nipple, when the baby is suckling. So there are a lot of people think that things are already solved. There's many unsolved things.
So many.
And the way I explain this to them is like, there are many unsolved things. I said, how do clouds form? We don't know. People think they know. The thing is, we don't. Why do they aggregate as such? Why we don't have any answers. We know, how they form, but we don't know why they form.
Yeah, you're right. My goodness.
In the same way, we have many fundamental things in our body that we don't know anything about. I mean, one of the most fundamental questions that I was working at before, which is separate from consciousness, is, for example, life itself. I mean, I am surprised that many scientists today assume that the issue of life has already been resolved, and what I'd like to say is that there is synthetic biology where you create artificial life, right? But until
Mm.
now, we have not created any artificial life from purely synthetic molecules. We
Mhm.
always need to have like the organism's capsule, the organism's intact cell membrane. We can
Yeah.
change the nucleus, we can change the mitochondria, we can change this, but we have not created any living thing from scratch, right?
Huh.
That is alive. So
Mm.
and people assume that we have with synthetic biology. We actually haven't. We just have
Yeah.
replaced parts of a cell. We can replace almost everything, but we have not created anything from scratch. And
Amazing.
maybe one of your brilliant listeners will figure out how to do it. But the whole field is called synthetic biology, and this is why I say, when people ask me about health optimization, etc., we've been
Mm.
so focused on how to repair this body,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
without even knowing how it really does its thing. How does it
Mm.
remain healthy?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
does it remain healthy? We don't even know how it remains healthy. We know
Yeah.
how it breaks down,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we don't know how it remains healthy. So it's like, I like to say, I'm even envious of the new cars right now. It has like all the sensors that go, it's 3,000 miles, time for you for your maintenance, and this and this and this and this, and we don't do that to ourselves, right?
We
And the
don't.
reason that we didn't do that to ourselves before is that we had no way to test,
Yeah.
right? and
Mm.
then and then metabolomics came in, the metabolites came in, right? And
Yes.
the field is fucking 40 years old, and it's now
It's not
reached,
new.
yeah, it's now reached the clinics, right? It's now reached the clinics, and now instead of just instead of just memorizing the Krebs cycle, we can now measure the levels of the metabolites of the Krebs cycle, right?
Mm. So cool.
And I remember when I was lecturing, when all of this was very new, Jodi, is that people were asking me for clinical studies on
Yeah.
on these metabolites, and I said, you know, you accepted this in medical biochemistry in second year, of
Now you
medical
want studies?
school. It's like now you want studies? I said, seriously. I said, show me a clinical study on the Krebs cycle. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's like, and it's sort of like it hits you differently because now
Mm.
you're actually getting closer.
Yeah.
You're getting closer to those very things that give you an idea of whether or not you're in and out of balance. So
Yeah.
not in terms of disease, but now
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at the body as a network of these organisms that are cooperating with each other, right?
Mm.
And you can throw just like an ecosystem, like a jungle, or the Amazon rainforest. Each species has its own particular part that it does,
Mm.
and if you imbalance one, the whole thing will respond. The thing that we haven't been looking at the proper way, I think, in illness medicine, is that we look at things like fever, for example, as something that's bad for the
Yeah.
patient, right, or the client.
Mm.
But the way we look at it in health optimization is that this is a way that the body is compensating for an imbalance, right? Or this is the way the body has learned to fight off invaders. So
Yes.
what does it do when you get a virus, for example? The fever goes up because most viruses cannot withstand hot temperatures,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what do? We give, acetaminophen and whatever to lower the fever, and
Mm-mm.
then we give antibiotics. It's interesting what we do, right?
Yeah.
And however, there are I'm not saying that we shouldn't give antibiotics. If in acute pneumonias, for example, yeah, sure, you need those. In
Mm.
acute trauma, hey, you need surgeons for those.
Yeah.
But you see that the illness medicine has a very dismal record for chronic diseases like diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and so on. and
Mm.
and and you know, someone called this a long time ago, these are like lifestyle diseases, you know, before it was even vogue to call it lifestyle diseases. And it's people found it insulting. But if you take a look at your lifestyle, you know, the cumulative insult that your imbalances that you're accumulating in your holobiont network is the one that's responding to it. It's not
Mm.
it's not that the response is bad per se, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what the cell is doing um, at that level. It may be
Mm.
bad for you as
Mm.
an individual. It's like, you know, shit. You know, I'm feeling I'm feeling very hot. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what you're saying. But that's your body actually responding the way it learned to in
It should
evolution
do.
on how
Yeah.
to deal, how you do it. And one of the things that you're also looking at, for example, one of the this is called the evolutionary medicine view, right? Like for example, if you're putting in something toxic all the time, right? If you're putting something toxic, exposing yourself to something toxic all the time, what's the imperative of the cell? The cell will say, I want to survive and reproduce, because that's
Mm.
the basic evolutionary imperative, right?
Mm.
I want to survive and reproduce. So it will say, okay, I want to survive. It will break ranks, meaning it will get itself out of the immune regulatory system, right?
Mm.
And it will survive and reproduce, and that's what we call cancer. So if you're looking at it from this type of perspective, you will see that much of what the body is doing is trying to get itself back into its own balance,
Yeah.
right? From the individual cell all to the systems, etc. And this was my thinking when I was thinking about health optimization medicine,
Mm.
right? But for me, it's like, how can we measure this? What are the things that we can measure? And turns out metabolomics is there. We can now measure your levels of of metabolites, you know, those molecules that are part of the biochemical processes. You can now measure them from inside the cell, and you could also measure their levels between cells, and you could see what's going on, and then you could balance, you could give it to the body, right?
Mm.
And people like to say, oh, so this is preventive medicine. I say no, 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 it's not preventive. Preventive is the purview of illness medicine still. Preventive medicine will be across populations, like preventive medicine in coronavirus pandemic, for example, or preventive medicine in in for example, the vaccinations that you're
Mm.
giving.
Mm.
So that's why I refer more to health optimization as health maintenance medicine. How do you maintain
Mm.
health, right?
Yes.
Like the way you
Yes.
maintain your car. So
Yes.
what do you look at when you maintain your car? You look at the oil, you look at and here we're looking at the metabolites. So when you
Yes.
measure these metabolites, then you say, okay, here's what we can do.
Mm.
You can give your supplements and your hormones, nutrients, etc., to balance out your network. Now, what else can you do? You can remove the toxins, right?
Yeah.
So your oil is gunky. You have to change oil, and one of the things, the field is called exosomics, right?
Yeah.
Which is looking at your poisons, and one of the great scourges that we're experiencing today is, I see a lot of mercury levels rising in my
Mm.
patients. I see cadmium rising.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly, I had a physician who was also my client, and he loved to eat uh, canned food. And from before, whereas now tin is actually banned, you could
Mm.
see that the tin levels are very, very high.
Wow.
So you could see this. The whole field of exosomics is actually a big one, because not only are you looking at heavy metals. You're all in food. You're also looking at the pollutants in the air. There are studies that show, when you run in a city versus when you run in a country, sometimes it's probably better for you to be in a treadmill in your house rather than running the streets.
Yeah.
Another thing that's insidious, phototoxicity, blue light at night, and so on. Another thing that's insidious is also your EMF, right? Your
Absolutely.
electromagnetic field exposure. And we are, since just because we don't see it, doesn't mean that we're not getting affected by it. Right?
Yeah.
So, and these are the kinds of toxins that we're looking at, right? And of course, the most terrible toxin of all, is a toxic partner. Okay. or a toxic boss.
Absolutely. And I love your motto. And I was going to bring it in later on, but I think that's fantastic that you eat well, your love well.
Yeah.
What's all of them? Tell me all of them.
Yes. It's sleep well.
That's
right?
it. Yeah. First.
And then hydrate well.
That's
right?
it.
Eat well.
Yes.
Ground well.
Yes.
Sun well. There are 8 of them.
Yeah. Love well.
Love well was
connect. Was it connect well? What was one of them? No, I can't remember. I should have written it down. Relate. That's it.
Relate well. Relate well.
Yeah.
Love well.
Love those.
Yes, and all of those can be measured. All of these, so you can fuck well. I'm kidding. I'm not.
Yeah, no, you're not. You're definitely not. I love that. You know what? I was gonna ask you that, being one of the smartest people in the world, and I think my answer's already been answered, and my question's already been answered. In that, what gets you up in the morning, and what's your passion? Because you know so much, and I would love to be able to take only part of the brain of yours, because it's just so fascinating and so wonderful, and what you can take in, the information. What makes you get up and motivate and do what you do every day? Aren't you the boredom, knowing everything so much already?
No, there's so much to know. It's not boring at all. What bores me are ordinary concerns, like having to pay my bills, or
oh yeah, tell me about it.
Or having to have my car inspected. Those kinds of things are like, well, okay. But the Jodi, I'm going to go against the grain of many self-help books out there, and I tell this to anyone who would listen, is that don't go after passion. Don't go after what you're passionate about. Because passion will fizzle. It will stay there. Just any romantic love affair, it fizzles. And passion is the same thing. You're passionate about something. That's why I tend to run away when I hear people say, "Oh my God, it's my passion." It's like, okay, until when? Anyway.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yes,
I like this.
What I tell them is set your life's purpose. And set your purpose according to principle, because a life purpose according to goals would just let you down. If you say your life purpose is I want to be the most blah 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 blah, then you're setting a goal. A good life's purpose would be setting your purpose by principle. Like for example, let me give you my life's purpose. My purpose is to decrease suffering in myself, right? And my greater purpose is to decrease suffering in others. And then the rejoinder to that has been said by the Buddha and by so many other people. knowing that there are no others. So there's, to decrease suffering in
Mm.
myself and to decrease suffering in others, knowing that there are no others. So if you set your life's purpose by that kind of principle, then you will be setting goals in accordance to that purpose. Right?
Mm.
And
Fascinating.
so that keeps you like going every day, right?
Yes.
That keeps you going every day. Like for example, uh, uh, and suffering can have many definitions for many people.
Yeah.
For example, in health optimization is like, yeah, you would like to decrease the suffering of your clients or your patients who are suffering from one health imbalance or the other.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even, it's not even disease, it's just that they couldn't sleep well, they're always weak all the time, they couldn't get it up, all of these things that are not diseases. they're not even diseases in and of themselves, right?
No.
but
Yeah.
but they are actually the effects of stress, the lifestyle that they're living,
Mm-hmm.
inadequate exposure to the sun. um I tell this to my students. I teach to my students. One of the things I notice is that my patients whose levels are 50 and above,
Mm.
um, actually their diseases become secondary. They
Mm.
become healthier.
Yeah.
In fact, I had this woman who was a smoker, right? She was the powerful CFO of company, etc. And she had so many other things that were like imbalances, but she was in when you look at her, she was energetic and so on.
Mm.
And her vitamin D level was like fucking 65 or something like that, and
Yeah.
which was great. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, it's not really allowed for me to smoke in my building. So at lunchtime, she goes out and she smokes a cigarette
In the sun.
walking around sleeveless,
Ah, sleeveless.
around around the building. Yeah. So
Wow.
yeah, and you could see how simple lifestyle changes like this, could actually help you. So you know teaching people, so as I said, decreasing suffering would be that in terms of health, right? You
Mm.
simple lifestyle changes, and then you could guide them through here's the objective measure of
Mm.
your metabolites and how well you're doing under this. Here's how much mercury you've taken out. Here's how your alpha lipoic acid is balanced. Here's your with the balancing of your alpha lipoic acid, since it's a hypoglycemic agent. Here's your blood glucose. You were pre-diabetic before, you're now not pre-diabetic anymore.
Yeah.
So you could see all of this um, uh, pre-disease syndromes, right, going
Mm.
away.
Mm.
Because health optimization medicine doesn't have any claims, to
No.
treat a disease. We detect and correct imbalances, right? That's all we do. We don't
Yeah.
diagnose and treat disease. That's
Mm.
illness medicine. I've been there.
Mm.
I know how that works.
Yeah.
But that's decreasing suffering. Another
Mm.
way, you could define suffering by the incapacity to deal with stress, right? If
Yes.
you have uh, 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 inappropriate response to stress, right?
Mm. Mm.
Whether it be voluntary or involuntary. Involuntary would be, like having asthma, or severe allergies, etc. That's, hyperreactive response to stress.
Mm.
And um and uh you know uh if you're a man, for example, and you're taught that, you're not supposed to express your emotions when you're stressed out, etc., etc., then you become this hypertensive, unemotional person, and become emotionally unavailable to everyone else, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
these are kinds of things that can be suffering. And and for me, I want to get to the core of like what's really a definition of suffering for me,
Mm.
because a lot of people define, say I want to be happy without really um, not really defining what's happiness for them is.
That's
For
right.
me, happiness is the absence of suffering. So what is the absence of suffering? And for me, it's you know um, suffering is the way your self or your egoic self, clings to the cravings and aversions, right? So, and then when you get lost in thought, for example, and that becomes you. Like, for example, someone does this to you, while cutting you off on the highway.
Yeah.
You suddenly become anger itself. That's your identity.
Yeah.
Right? And that's your ego, and that's Jodi at that particular moment, who is totally identified.
I would never do that.
Never ever.
No, never.
So that's for me is very simple. When your attention is hijacked by your thoughts and emotions, you are already suffering, right? Because it's remember that the ego or the self is the one that wants experience all the time.
Yeah.
I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. I don't want this, I don't want that. When you hear someone saying, I want, I don't want, you already know that that person is suffering. Right? But sometimes, because it's very hard to, look at the definition of, like for example, suffering is the identification with the ego. That's a difficult definition for many people to understand. It's like, it's easier to say, suffering is when anger becomes you. It's like it becomes your identity, right?
Yeah.
At that moment, there, Jodi is this. So it means that there's no space around the anger. There's no okay, it's just an emotion that just arose.
Yeah.
You cannot look at the emotion as just a content of your consciousness. It becomes you.
Yeah.
Right? And the ego is very good at this. It will grab a memory, it will pull out an emotion, and then it's like, you fuck, you hurt me, la 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 la. And when there is that storyteller, right? When there is that storyteller in there, then when someone owns the experience, you know that you're suffering already, because there's a self that owns it, right? And this is like a sort of like high grade teaching of what suffering is like. It's like when you try to reduce it to its, what is it really at its smallest form, is that when you become self-identified with the ego, or when your attention is hijacked by your thoughts and emotions, you're fucked. You're suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you'll always be, even as I like to say, even if you're just looking for a cup, I want a cup of tea. There's already a desire right there. That's why, in Buddhism, they usually say, it's desire, that's a root of suffering. It's not, it's the attachment.
Yeah.
To that desire, and attachment means you're identified with it. Right?
Yeah.
You're identified with that. So for me, it's as simple as that, because, for example, you're desiring for this delicious piece of cake, right?
Yeah.
That is suffering itself, right? And when you give in to that, you'll see the consequences.
Exactly.
Eating like a scoop of ice cream for men, would drop the testosterone levels for at least 24 hours.
Yeah.
So you know all of these effects, and then if you do that, for example, I'll use this example actually in the Philippines, when for every little occasion they eat, right? It's a very oral culture. Every little, you fart, they eat. It's like it just it's like, oh, just this time, and oh, just this time, right?
Yeah.
And even if you don't need to eat, they will serve you food, because that's the culture, until you and of course they would serve the most addicting sweet stuff, right? Because sugars can give you the kind of high, and and so you see this accumulate in your lifestyle, and you gain weight.
Yes. Yes.
Whenever I come back from the country, I'm here. I have 5 pounds on me.
No.
Aside from the information of jet lag, of course.
Yes.
But and then I do my fasting for a couple of weeks, and I lose the 5 pounds, and then you go back again, and you gain it all back, and then back. But I'm such a poor example for chronobiology, but which
because
is
you travel
another
so
pillar
much.
of health
Yes.
optimization. Yeah. So that's for me is as I said, if you set your life's purpose by principle rather than by goal, you would um, you would set goals that are more in line with what you really can do for long periods of time. They're not
Yes.
necessarily,
That short-term
I jump
motivator.
from I jump from one special to the other, but I completed everything, right? But for me, is that now how do I use that to decrease suffering in myself? How do I use it to decrease suffering in others? Right?
Yeah.
And
I
so
love that.
if you do things by principle, you won't get lost. I was recently talking to uh, a young life coach,
Oh,
because
yes.
it's like I when a life coach is below 30 years old, they're sort of like
Oh, great.
And I go, okay, your understanding of life is so much different.
Yes.
So I have to respect a lot of people who are older than me, even who are not as educated as I am, because they've seen more of life than I have.
Yeah.
Right? And they have the emotional stability and everything else that sometimes I admit only age can bring. But but it's possible. It's possible to have. For me, happiness is equanimity, right?
Yes.
It's equanimity, and by that, you've heard this expression that I've used before. I don't want to be happy. I just want to be minimally perturbable. So
Yeah, I love that.
and I like to say I don't like tidal waves of joy, and but because that you will meet deep whirlpools of sorrow. Other
Yeah.
people may like that. It's not for me. You know, I'm okay with the wave just bobbing up and down and remaining deep in the lake. It's just like,
Yeah.
okay,
I'm the
that's
same.
fine.
I agree. I'm
That's
much like that as
fine.
well. I don't like having those really big highs and really big lows. I like to just waving along.
Yeah, so that's Jody. That's what uh,
That's what gets you up.
uh,
That's what
gets
keeps you
me
going.
going in the morning.
Yes.
Gets me going in the morning and gets me thinking about if this is good for me, this will probably be good for other people. And as I
Yeah.
find out, for example, for health optimization medicine, I did it for myself and for my practice because I wanted to be able to have a practice that incorporated all the new sciences that were coming out, that were becoming clinically relevant. For example, mitochondria, microbiota, exposomics, uh, epigenetics, chronobiology, evolutionary medicine. So when you're taking a look at all of this, and this was 11 years ago now, and I
Amazing.
said, all of these are becoming clinically relevant, and they're still not teaching it in medical schools. Now,
Yeah.
how do I put this all together as a single, as a practice? And it turns out that, either uh, doctors would refer their patients to me that are cases that they could not do anything anymore about. They cannot give any more drugs, and so on and so forth. And I don't do any functional medicine approach to them, right? All I do is I just take a look at their levels of hormones and nutrients, and I put them at a level where it's between 21 and 30 years old. And when you're there, and I can show you that you're there, we're done.
Yeah.
And whatever happens to you is what I call a beneficial side effect.
Yes.
No claims. No claims is beneficial side effect. There have been many requests. Said, Dr. Ted, why don't you say, you're able to treat diabetes and so on? I don't. There was a 30-year diabetic that's no longer diabetic and so on. They say, no. It's what gets us in trouble with illness medicine people, right?
Yes.
Because diseases will necessarily require quantitative analysis.
Yes.
But we are after health. So we are after the quality of life. So we only have qualitative reports.
Yes.
Right? Qualitative. We're not after a disease. But the wonderful thing that has happened was just all the developments in epigenetics last year, where epigenetics are these mechanisms that are outside of your DNA that is remembered by your DNA that you can pass on to your offspring, right?
Yes.
So it affects how your genes are expressed, and they are not actually in the genes themselves. So an example for that is that you may have a gene for breast cancer, for example, but if you live the proper lifestyle, those genes can get silenced by these epigenetic mechanisms. And this is where, your anti-stress programs like yoga and, meditation, etc., they all come in, and they affect you epigenetically, right? To do that. And one of the things that was developed last year was called Epigenetic Clock, right? Where they could show you. It's like the plaque on the teeth, right? The dentist can show your age by how much plaque you have accumulated in your teeth. So and that's called the Horvath clock, and the plaque is like the epigenome, it accumulates there. So are there substances that can actually take out the plaque and restore it to a pristine condition? And we already know a Nobel award was given to Dr. Yamanaka of Japan for the discovery of the Yamanaka factors. What they do is they actually take out the plaque and restore the cell, take out the epigenetic crud, or and restore it into its young condition. And one of the interesting things about this clock, there are several of them. So time from birth would be the Horvath clock, right? So if you're younger, you see that you have less plaque than the others, you have less crud in your epigenome, which is sitting on top of your DNA. If you have less of those, then you're actually younger than your biological age. Your epigenetic age is younger, right? If you have more, then you're older. So that's the Horvath clock, right? But there's also what's called the Grim Age clock, from after the Grim Reaper, which is the time to death clock. And what's interesting about it is that by artificial intelligence, they superimpose the data of about, I think, 2,000 cases in the smokers data in the Framingham Heart Study, right, which is a well-acted data set. And they found out that if you're, just putting in your smokers data, is actually enough to generalize to the general public on what their time to death is actually going to be. But the more interesting part of it is time to disease. So time to your first heart attack, time to your first stroke, and time to your first morbidity, etc. Those can now be predicted with great accuracy by these clocks.
Amazing.
And people don't know this, but it's going to be a challenge to illness medicine people. Are your drugs pulling me away from my Grim Age clock, right? From my time to first morbidity? Are your drugs pulling me away from my first heart attack? or are they not? And so now, here's a health optimization medicine tool, right? Or a health optimization practitioner tool where we measure how much did we make you healthier, how much did we make you younger. Now it becomes a challenge to the illness medicine group. It's like, hey, how how far did you pull me away from my first heart attack with your drugs? If they can't show anything, then they're not really doing their work. So
that's right.
And that for me is interesting, right? That for me is interesting because now you have a different measure. Your measure is now intracellular, deep molecular and stuff. It will make for a good challenge, but at the same time, it will also revise protocols and drugs that we use, right? For illness.
Absolutely.
And for us, we have a measure of whether or not our lifestyle measures that we recommend to our patients and clients, actually work. Right? So,
and I absolutely love the HOMeHOPe way, and that's what drew me to it in the beginning, is just bringing it back down to those basics. And it made so much sense to me of what you were trying to create. And then those pillars, your 7 pillars, are just, it encompasses everything, and from a basis of just bringing back down to that foundational level that can heal the whole innate system, that innate healing. It's just, it makes so much sense. It should be done everywhere. Everyone should be doing this to be able to heal their body.
Our system is intelligent enough. It knows how to balance itself.
Exactly.
Sometimes it just needs this proper nudge from us, a little nudge here and there. It's like, hey, I'm really running out of vitamin E. You should give me some.
We need it.
And you very well that vitamin E is part of the antioxidant regeneration system. So if you take a look at vitamin E, probably your vitamin C is going to be low too, and so is your alpha lipoic acid, because that they're all attached to each other. And that's one of the principles. You know this. If you touch one thing in a network, the rest of the network will move.
It shifts.
And for me, that's a beautiful art form.
Yes,
right? That's why the practice is an art itself. The science is there; it's solid. You know how to measure things, etc. But how you balance them, becomes an art, because you also have to take into consideration your client's temperament. I cannot take so much pills and blah blah blah. And many of them will say, "Oh no, Dr. Ted, I'm just gonna eat good food," and so on and so forth. And so you challenge them. Okay, what foods are rich in alpha lipoic acid? Don't know. What foods are what foods are rich in CoQ10? Don't know. so then
that's created.
Take your supplement. I know that you're not gonna eat good food. So these are the kinds of things that's part of the art of balancing. There's the whole science is down pat. It's easy. 1, 2, 3. One measure. Two balance. Compared to the range 21 to 30, and then use network wide range shifting. Don't just shift one value, which is what we're doing example for testosterone these days. It's just we're just gonna give you a shot of that.
Give you that,
you're fine. So not realizing that it all comes in a network. And then 3 is, of course, you use a network wide range, meaning you shift the entire range of values, not just one. And so that's the science. It's very easy, right? But the art of it is really dependent on your client. Like for example, the younger athletes or the competitive CEOs who have a lot of discipline, etc., they would follow the protocol to the letter, right? And they would get great results. And right. And there will be those who cannot follow a single instruction that you give.
And you have to work with that. That's the creativity.
You have to get creative. You have to learn how to motivate and so on. And that's where you as a practitioner would shine, because it depends on how good you are at motivating people.
It's creating that relationship, isn't it?
Eat properly. yeah, and to eat properly, to hydrate themselves, you know, uh, and so on. And sometimes, one of the things that I noticed before, when initially I was going back to the Philippines, was that I was wondering how come, uh, you know um, there were, yeah, like a lot of women, with bad breath, and I didn't know why
Hmm.
this was, and the reason was that they were not drinking enough water because there were no clean places to pee.
Oh, so that was
Yeah.
stopping themselves
So they
drinking.
would they would dehydrate themselves. They would stop themselves from
Wow.
drinking, so they don't have to go to very, very dirty toilets.
Huh.
See, so you have all of these things going, when
Yes.
you're looking at, uh, 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 for example, when I would be balancing like the cortisol levels of people, and I would notice that my patients there would get muscular cramps, and I thought, well, muscle cramps. Um, I thought it was like magnesium, poor magnesium intake, etc. No, Philippine food was excessively salty, and
Yeah. Too
you know,
much.
and yeah, and they were essentially hoarding their salt and peeing out their potassium. So I had,
Hmm.
for that particular culture, I had to give potassium instead of
Yeah.
magnesium or anything. So I had to give extra potassium uh, to the clients. It's
So
interesting.
clever. It is.
You
It's
have
so
to
interesting.
consider, it's all the part of the art of that.
Yeah.
So and as a country in the tropics also, they have very low vitamin D levels. It's because white skin is prized over there.
Yeah.
You're fair skinned.
Don't get out there so you don't go
You-
dark.
yeah, you're deemed to be more beautiful, and therefore you're more marketable.
It's
More
crazy.
mateable,
Whereas in
whatever.
Australia, the browner you are, the better you are.
I
Everyone's trying
yeah.
to get
So
tanned here.
yeah. So there are things like those. So it's not only like, as I said, you mentioned the 7 pillars.
Mm.
The mitochondria is good. Their
Hmm.
microbiota, especially the gut microbiota, which is now the focus, especially for improving your immune system, because it's the largest
Yeah.
immune system in the body. Your exposomics, the toxins, the chronobiology, the evolutionary medicine, and epigenetics. They form these seven pillars, but in the end, it's also getting your client to understand that within each of the 7 pillars is a lifestyle change that they need to make, right?
Yes.
They're
Yeah.
associated with lifestyle changes. If you're looking at chronobiology, for example, then they have to learn about sleep hygiene. They have to learn about dark rooms, room temperature, that's best for sleeping, and other things that they have to do before you even address the insomnia, right?
Mm.
Because sometimes the insomnia could be as simple as poor sleep hygiene,
Yeah.
right? They would sleep at all times of the night. They don't have a set time for sleeping. They look at their phones. The blue light of their phones. They get awake.
Mm.
Within 2 hours of sleep. They eat right before sleeping. My
Mm.
advice is like, finish your meal 3 hours before you go to bed,
Yeah.
because three hours is the gastric emptying time. At least your stomach is already emptied, and don't eat anything else during the
Mm.
period. Drink some water, right?
Mm.
So each one of those has a lifestyle change that is useful for them. For microbiota, right? If your doctor prescribes you an antibiotic for some acute infection or something like that, you should learn to ask, when can I start taking probiotics, or when can I put probiotics in? Are there instead of this antibiotic, can I use synthetic antibiotic? Can I use a natural antibiotic instead, like oregano oil or berberine? There are natural antibiotics in there with less side effects on carpet bombing your entire gut microbiota.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know whether or not you were already born then, Jody, but I remember that we used to give antibiotics to pigs, right? Or cattle to fatten them up, right? And
Right.
yeah, and then now there are correlative studies, like you take antibiotics 10 years earlier, and 10 years later you're actually obese. So there are
Yeah.
now those types of correlative studies.
Yeah.
So you could see, there's also the changes because your bacteria grow according to what you eat, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, what are you eating, and so on. It's very, very, very important. I think it's in fact one of the aside from the testing, it's the first thing that we look at in health optimization is what's the health status of your gut
Yeah.
and your gut microbiota.
Mm.
Do you have a leaky gut, and so on. And then we of course take a look at your mitochondria. Many of them are complaining about weakness all the time, right? And sometimes it's just a simple, you take a look at their vitamin B levels, which are your energy vitamins. They're involved mostly in your mitochondrial function, and you give them vitamin B, and then they're actually performing a lot better. But there are lots of vitamin B rich foods, and you check their diet and you could see that they're not eating vitamin B rich foods, or uh, what they're doing in terms of or they're eating too much, right? You're not giving your mitochondria time to rest, and time to and time to divide, to renew themselves, right?
Yeah.
So and that's another lifestyle change. For example, the old way of dealing with diabetes was, frequent feedings. Well, that's no longer true, because by
No.
frequent feedings you're going to just spike the insulin, the glucose, every time that the person want, right? So the way that the way the thinking has changed around the treatment of diabetes, it surrounds that kind of lifestyle advice, right?
Yeah.
For me, for example, personally, I just eat twice a day, right? I eat,
Yeah. I was going to ask
my
you
first meal
what
is
your daily thing looks like.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I just eat something at noon, and then I eat something for dinner, and that's it. Just 2 meals, and that's good enough for me, and it has kept my weight, for example, more or less constant, despite hectic travel schedules and all that.
Yeah.
It does that. And for many people, it's what I ask them to do is, if you cannot control what you eat, at least control the time you eat,
Yes.
right? uh, and they're okay with that. Like what, doctor? First try around, a 12-hour feeding window, and then you decrease that to 10 hours, and then decrease it to 8 hours, and that's good enough for me, right? But mitochondria actually can already regenerate with a 12-hour fast if you include that with your sleep. But it's a lot better to keep the feeding window shorter, like to 8, because you're basically extending your carbohydrate fast, right? The whole
Yeah.
point is actually to decrease and I hate it when people don't know what carbohydrates are.
Me too. Me too. Oh, no, I've stopped eating pasta. Okay. Okay.
And even doctors, I ask them, do you know what net carbs are? You know, and it's like, oh, it's a high carbohydrate diet. Yeah, I said I eat a high carbohydrate diet, and they get shocked. And it's like, I didn't say a high refined carbohydrate diet.
Exactly.
you know, I didn't say a high soluble carbohydrate diet. Most of the carbohydrate I'm taking is insoluble. And I can't repeat this enough. The fastest disappearing macronutrient in in the diet of the human species is fiber.
Yeah.
Right. And I have lots of older patients and clients, and one of the things they complain about is constipation.
Yeah.
Right. And you just increase their fiber intake and they're okay. You could see how, and this is again another lifestyle advice, things like this. When in exposomics, in that area of environmental toxicity, for example, there's a lot of things to be discussed over there, right? From your exposure to EMF, turning off your Wi-Fi routers at night, to your exposure to blue light at night, and to examining the food that you're eating. One of my recent cases was actually chronic mercury toxicity from eating fish, pescatarian for 10 years, right? And mercury levels were rising, and so you could then ask the patient or client to vary what they eat, or examine other source of toxins in their homes, right?
Absolutely.
For example, there are studies there are already studies that children who live in high tension wires, with high electrical voltage, they develop leukemia. That still needs to get still needs to get explained, right? And that's an environmental toxin.
Absolutely.
So eating, for example, the packaging, where you get your food, styrofoam, you could see the molecule actually accumulate in the patient or client. So where you store your food, or is this in plastics, is this in I don't fucking care if it says microwave safe.
Don't microwave it.
So even microwaving, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of things that can be taught in exposomics, and when you go to as a microbiology, there's a lot of sleep advice that you would give, right? Your sleep hygiene, and in evolutionary medicine is looking at it's a perspective of what particular habits have you actually been doing in your life, that has accumulated into this type of metabolic dysfunction, for example, because that's how the body would respond. That's how it's really very simple. For example, let's get to a really, really very simple example. If you have a skin tag right where your belt buckle is, for Christ's sakes, get the skin tag removed, right? Because it's just gonna irritate it. These are the kinds of things that we look at. This is how the body responds, right? This is how the body will respond by evolution. So, for example, if you're having a fever, when should you take an antipyretic? For kids, I usually advise on giving them unless they are prone to seizures, right? And they usually are. That's why they give antipyretics. But for adults, I usually shove them in a cold shower, right? Go take a cold shower, right? And to bring, if it's very uncomfortable for you, to bring that temperature down. So when are you going to, I know you have a cast if you have a sprain, but should you really be walking around? The body normally swells at around the ankle,
Yeah.
that's its way of immobilizing it. And then you take something for pain, right? And now you
Yeah.
could socialize, and now you delay the healing of that
Exactly.
sprain, right? So again, just by looking at evolutionary medicine alone, the body has this way of healing itself. And how much should you intrude into the healing process? How much should you intervene in the healing process? And it's a very practical question, right? And then of course with epigenetics, what are the other things? Say you got gene tests, etc. My response is usually, so fucking what? I'm already too old to if I could, for example, inject the follistatin gene into my system and it will somehow take, so I don't need to exercise anymore, then well and good, right? But no, I'm beyond the designer baby stage in my life. I can't be a designer baby anymore. So what are the things that you could do to silence, for example, cancer genes, right? There's a methylation pathway. Take a look at whether or not you're hypomethylated and so on. Of course, those are the markers. But in terms of lifestyle, it's very easy to identify, choline and methyl-rich foods, for example. And you could go and actually enroll yourself in a meditation course. You can, and de-stressing course. You could divorce your husband. You could, you could do so many things to affect that epigenome.
Absolutely.
And and one of the biggest controllers of your epigenome is your gut microbiota.
Yeah.
They can control your epigenome. They can control your mood. They can control, a lot of things. And so just looking at each of these pillars, you already know where my advice of sleep well, eat well, hydrate well, ground well, sun well, relate well, love well. So you see how those are actually measurable, right?
Absolutely.
But because people always ask me how, if you cannot afford the testing because it's still relatively expensive and so on, I said, it's actually easy. You do the following lifestyle changes, but the point is, you don't like to do the lifestyle changes.
Exactly. That's why you're there.
Yeah. But for the other people, they want, and for me myself, since I'm a doctor, I want to have some markers, some guideposts, right?
Yeah.
Am I actually doing balancing in this person? Am I exacerbating a particular issue? So
amazing.
for example,
Cool.
for some patients, for example, I'm only here because of my wife, right? They come here, I'm only here because of my wife, blah, blah, blah. And then I don't have any problems, I don't have any issues. And then 6 months later, they go, oh my God, Dr. Ted, I never thought it was possible to feel this way. So what I say at the beginning of my session is that my goal for you in this relationship, right, in this therapeutic relationship, is to get you addicted to the feeling of wellness.
Oh, I love it. I love that.
So, when you're addicted to the feeling of wellness, when you're off kilter, right? When you're off balance, you will immediately know it. Like the way you feel awful, you say you really wanted to eat a cake, you ate it without any guilt because it's one of the things that you like to do, and then 3 hours later you're feeling grouchy and
not so well.
So and there it is, right?
Yes, that's the proof in the pudding.
That you know where your center is in terms of wellness. So
absolutely.
That's
very cool.
That's what I'm trying to do, is that with us practitioners, we have an objective measure we can guide you through. Aside from the tests, we have your practical advice and so on. Plus, we like to think that we know a little bit more about what's going on in the current fields where they are, right?
Yeah.
Because before a drug comes to market, there's already 10 years there and $600 million later, right? But for us, it's there, it's shown. What was the most recent one that I reviewed, that I sent you, is that,
RNA.
and this was already at a regular, at a regular, the microRNA that's relevant to your immediately relevant to your viewers or listeners is the walking, right? And that was a Journal of American Medical Association. 8,000 to 12,000 steps, of any intensity daily is decreases all-cause mortality. So significantly decreases all-cause mortality.
Really?
It's simple.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So just any intensity. Right. So
amazing.
Little things like this. From Europe, I learned, walking 2 miles a day uninterrupted, would be good enough to increase longevity. But this one is the JAMA, and it was just released in March of 2020, where they correlated the number of steps that you take daily versus your all-cause mortality, and they found that 8,000 to 12,000 steps daily. Of any intensity is enough to significantly reduce all-cause mortality. Yeah, and who doesn't want to do that? It's very simple.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and enjoyable.
Yeah.
Wow.